Hi, my name is Dr.AhMath. Welcome to the course of Biophysics 1. In this lecture, we're going to discuss the action potential in the cardiac muscle. So when we are looking to the cell membrane, so the charge difference between inside and outside of the membrane is called the membrane potential. And spontaneous increase and decrease of the potential membrane is called the action potential. So we can see the action potential in the neurons, which are responsible to transmit the signal, or we can have the action potential in the skeletal muscles, which are responsible to coordinate our bodies. And we can have sometimes the action potentials in the endocrine system, which are responsible to release some hormones, for example, the insulin. So in this lecture, we're going to briefly talk about how the action potential is basically created. So what is this for the neurons? And then we're going to talk about what is the shape of the action potential in the cardiac muscles. So here is the two images of the action potential in the neuron and the skeletal muscle. So they might look very much similar, so their principle is the same, more or less this again. So basically the membrane potential is increased until some level and it decreases, right? So here the y-axis is going to be the volt, so the membrane potential in volts, and here is going to be the time. So for example, action potential timing for the neuron is going to be between 2 milliseconds. And for the skeletal muscles, they might be 5 milliseconds. And for the cardiac muscles, they might be longer. So we're going to discuss how it works for the cardiac muscle. So this is our objective for this lecture. So let's talk about how these action potentials are created in neurons. So last time we talked about all of these structures. So we said, hey, so the charge, so basically, so across the membrane, we are going to have some ions of the potassium or the sodium ions. And usually the charge inside is going to be smaller than outside. So that is why the potential membrane is going to be negative inside the cell and positive outside the cell. So one of the reasons why the potential membrane is inside, so negative inside, is because of this sodium potassium pump. So sodium potassium pump. So sodium potassium pump basically takes away 3 sodium ions, so which is going to be, so every sodium ion is going to have +1 charge. So 3 potassium, so 3 sodium ions is going to be +3 charge. So it takes out the 3 sodium ions and it takes in to the cell 2 potassium ions. So in every time, so you need to imagine that we're going to have a bunch of this kind of pumps, which are always taking away +3 charge and taking in +2 charge. And obviously at the end, in the long range, we're going to have the less charge inside the cell. So that is why we're going to have the negative membrane potential inside the cell. So, and also we're going to have this kind of gates, so the channels, the potassium channel where the potassium is usually going out because the concentration of the potassium inside the cell is higher than outside, so the potassiums tend to go outside. And the concentration of the sodium is outside is higher, so that's why they tend to go inside. So there are always constant movement between the potassium and the sodium. So the penetrability of the potassium and sodium ions are going to basically form the action potential. So there are 2 more channels which are really important. So they are called the voltage gated channels. So basically they depend on the voltage of the potential membrane inside the cell. So if the potential membrane's value is becoming -5 to 55 inside the cell, this sodium voltage gated sodium channel is going to be opened. So this channel is called the voltage gated sodium channel. So it's going to open and let in lots of sodiums into the cell. So since the concentration of the sodium outside the cell is higher, so they go inside the cell. So basically, so there are lots of ions, sodium ions are going in. So they have the positive charge, so they increase the potential membrane inside the cell. So you can see this here in this curve, right? So they are increasing this. So it makes the potential membrane uh, value positive inside the cell and negative outside, because the charge inside the cell is going to be now higher than the charge outside. So this process, when the signs of the potential membrane inside and outside of the cell are going to change, is called the depolarization. So we used to have minus inside and plus outside. So now it becomes minus outside and plus inside. So this process is called the depolarization. So when the lots of sodium ions are going in, then when the charge inside of the cell is reaching plus 30, there's another voltage gated channel is going to be open. So this gate is called the voltage gated potassium channel. So this is going to be opened. And since the concentration of the potassium inside the cell is higher than outside, so lots of potassium ions are going out, and the charge inside the cell is going to go down. So the reason why it's going down is when it reaches plus 30, this gate is also going to be closed. So this gate is closed when it's reached the plus 30, and lots of potassium ions are going outside, and the charge inside the membrane potential is going to really decrease. So it usually decreases less than minus 30 because of the late closage of this voltage gated potassium channel. So it usually closes lately, so it crosses really a little bit, it goes down a little bit less than minus 7T. And then these two type of the gates are going to make the balance there. So and this process, when again the potential membrane is becoming again negative inside the cell, is called the repolarization, because in the beginning we used to have minus inside and plus outside, then it become minus outside and plus inside. This is called the depolarization. When this voltage gated potassium channel is opened and lots of potassium are going out, then the potential membrane inside the cell is becoming again negative, so it's called the repolarization. So this is really important terms for us. So the action potential in the cardiac muscles are going to work a little bit differently. So let's say, and the values of the potential membrane are also going to be different. So in the neuron, so the potential at rest is equal to the minus 70 millivolts, basically, when the neuron is at the rest, when it is not transmitting any signal. So the membrane potential is equal approximately to the minus 70 millivolts. And for the cardiac muscles, it's roughly equal to the minus 90 millivolts. So again, so we've got the lots of channels for the potassium and the sodium. So they are moving across the membrane. And then so suddenly this voltage gated sodium channels, voltage gated sodium channels are going to open, and the charge is going to increase, let's say, until minus 70 millivolts inside. So this will trigger other voltage gated sodium channels also open. So it means that they are going to be open widely and let in lots of sodium ions to go inside the cell. So this will increase the charge inside the cell dramatically. So this will increase until plus 20. So when it is reaching the plus 20 inside the cell, so the membrane potential is plus 20 because lots of sodium ions are went inside. Then this voltage gated sodium channel is going to be closed, and this will trigger to open the voltage gated potassium channels. So this green one, if you remember, it was voltage gated potassium channels. So they are going to open and they let in the potassium out. So basically let out the potassium. So the K plus is going to be out here. So it means that the membrane potential is going to decrease until +5. So when it reaches +5, there is the new type of the gate for the cardiac muscles, which are the voltage-gated calcium channels. Voltage-gated calcium channel. So this suddenly opens at the membrane potential value +5 millivolts and let in the calcium ions go inside to the cell. So the calcium ions are going to have +2 charge basically. So the potassium and sodium ions are going to have plus charge, they are +1 charge, and the calcium ions are going to have +2 charge. So at this stage, both of our voltage-gated channels are open. So two voltage-gated channels are open. So I've got the voltage-gated calcium channel, which is open, which lets in the calcium ions. And here we've got the voltage-gated channel for the potassium, which is also open, and it lets out the potassium ions. So it means that here is going to be a little bit balance in the membrane potential. So this is going to be in a balance. So basically the charge inside and outside, so outside the cell are not going to be changed. So they are going to be roughly like between 0 and +5 millivolts. So when it reaches so after some amount of the time, approximately like 150 milliseconds, so this voltage-gated calcium channels are going to close suddenly. So it means that no calcium ions are going inside, but this channel, so voltage-gated potassium channel is still open, so it lets out the potassium. So it means that the membrane potential is going to decrease a lot. So here, after roughly 200 milliseconds, after the membrane potential has increased, so it starts decreasing because this channel now is closed. So this channel is still open and lets out the potassium ions to go out. And then is also going in, so it's also going to be closed when it reaches -90. So then again, we are going to have the algorithm. So this process again from the beginning. So this is called the action potential for the cardiac muscles when we are going to have the increase of the potential membrane. But for the cardiac muscles, they are not going to decrease just after the increase. So they are going to hold on there for roughly 200 milliseconds. Then they are going to come down. So then they are going to do this always. So while, for example, for the neuron cells, so the action potentials happen whenever so the neurons needs to transmit a signal, not always. So, but the action potential in the cardiac muscles, they are going to produce, so they are going to happen always. So one action potential happens, then another one happens just after the previous one. So now let's if you remember, we call the process when the potential membrane signs are changing between inside and outside the cell. So at the rest, so the potential membrane is negative inside and positive outside. So then when the potential membrane is increasing inside of the cell, so their signs are going to change. So this is called the depolarization. So the depolarization happens here. So it increases from -90 millivolts until +20 millivolts. Then the potassium gates are going to open and let out the potassium ions, so that the membrane potential decreases until +5. Then the calcium voltage-gated calcium channels are going to be open and hold this potential membrane on this values for approximately 150, 200 milliseconds. And this stage is called the plateau stage. And after some time, so these voltage-gated calcium channels are going to go closed, while the voltage-gated potassium channels are still open. They let out the potassium ions, and the potential membrane is going to decrease. So again, the sign inside becomes minus and outside becomes plus. This process is again called repolarization. So this is how the potential action looks for the cardiac muscles. So you can see that the action potential principles are more or less the same for all types of the cells, but so they have some spatial characteristics. For example, for the action potential in the neurons, they usually happen in only 2 milliseconds, right? So while for the action potential in the cardiac muscle, they happen 200 milliseconds. So they are much longer, right? And for the action potential in the neuron, we usually have the depolarization and repolarization. While for the cardiac muscles, we're going to have the depolarization, then plateau, then repolarization. So in our next lecture, we're going to discuss more about the potential, action potential, so about more transmission of the action potential. Thank you.